Hi, my name is Tunji Williams. I am the host of Black Founder Hour, and it's a real honor to get to introduce you all to Mayor Colin Byrd. Colin Byrd is the youngest black mayor in the entire country. He is an incredible communicator and really kind of just an expansive thinker, and it's really steeped in an understanding of his own heritage, and I think fueled by a vision for his own future and for his community that makes him stand out. So it was a real pleasure to get to do this interview and to get to know Colin better through this conversation. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
All right. Good morning, Mayor Byrd. Are you there?
Yes, sir. Good morning to you, Mr. Williams. And it's a beautiful day. Thanks so much for having me.
It is a gorgeous day, and I'm really appreciative of your time. I know how busy you are. I know that you're in the midst of building your campaign and trying to govern and manage a city at the same time. So thanks for making time for us. You and I are new friends. I think we've known each other for a couple of months now. I was introduced to you through a gentleman I really respect, somebody I worked with in politics in Baltimore, who said you were the real deal. And I had to be in touch and learn more about you. You're gracious enough to give me time during March Madness, nonetheless, in the evening. I know you're a big basketball fan. Thank you for that. Want to use this conversation as a way to kind of get to know you better, and have our third or fourth meeting, I guess, in the public square, and let other folks come in and also kind of get to know who you are, as a person and as a builder and as an activist and leader, the leader that you are. So I guess with that, I'll just allow you to introduce yourself, but maybe frame the question this way. We know who you are, I guess, publicly, and hopefully you can tell us a little bit more about that. But I also want to know who is Colin Byrd? What is your constitution? What do you come from? What are you made of? And how does it drive you?
Yeah, well, look, my bill of rights is to make sure that the people are not sold a bill of goods. My bill of rights is to make sure that justice pervades every institution of society, and that we root out systemic racism and other issues. But let me kind of step back and tell you that how and why I got to where I am was not a lot of. It was not per se the most intentional route. There are some people who I know who are in public life who either are the heirs of political dynasties, or who have had their eyes on public office since the beginning of time. And I can tell you that it was the exact opposite for me. I mean, I grew up, frankly, wanting to be an NBA player. I'm from gorgeous Prince George's County, PG County. I think there was a documentary on Showtime last year called Basketball County. So my heroes growing up weren't necessarily your mainstream elected officials, but rather I had a great deal of appreciation for the likes of Kevin Durant and Michael Beasley. But honestly, there did come a point, particularly as I was transitioning from high school to college, where I really started to obviously look at the futility of my hoop dreams, and start to kind of take a different psychological and intellectual route. And it just so happened that around that time we were seeing unfortunately, we were seeing extrajudicial killings of unarmed Black men. And it's not to say that they weren't happening before, but they were being thrust into the spotlight in a way that was palpable and that was heart-wrenching for myself and others who are similarly situated. Of course, among the most heartbreaking of these was the killing of Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida, and the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And I can tell you that I was dismayed not only by the fact that they happened, but how they happened and what happened thereafter. Now, how they happened, I can tell you that literally we know with the case of Mr. Martin is all he did was he went to a convenience store, got Skittles and iced tea, and not too shortly thereafter, an individual operating under the guise of promoting public safety hounded him and murdered him. Now, in spite of the fact that that is what we know is what took place, of course, there was a trial that took place. And unlike what just happened this week with Mr. Floyd and Mr. Chauvin, justice was not served in the case of Mr. Martin, in the case of Mr. Zimmerman. And so that family, like many families, has to live with that pain, that regret, and also resentment of a system that failed them on the front end and a system that failed them on the back end. That's number one. Number two, and these are just two examples. There's so many that we could go to, but the Michael Brown one was particularly powerful. And it was sad because what you saw was a situation where a young man, again unarmed, was killed. And this time by somebody who was not just operating under the guise of public safety, but who was authorized by the government to operate in such a fashion. And he killed an unarmed individual. Mr. Brown, Officer Wilson, did that. Unfortunately, there was a dispute about what transpired prior to that killing. Many protesters, many observers said that Mr. Brown had his hands up and that he uttered the words, "Don't shoot me," because of the lack of evidence, because of the lack of a body camera, because of the lack of a phone camera. The officer got off scot-free. And it was troubling to me that not only could these things happen, but of course there could be so little justice and accountability on the back end. And so, what happened this past week was in some ways the ultimate relief for folks like myself who have tried to be on the front lines of engaging in pressing systems that have historically and currently been oppressive to change. Now, so I can tell you that from the inception of my involvement of work around civil rights advocacy and fighting against racial injustice, there have been really three themes that have been inextricably linked with my motivations. And one is racial justice, as I kind of alluded to. Another is labor justice. And the third is environmental justice, in no particular order, by the way. But, the labor justice thing comes out of the fact that I would organize on racial justice issues at the University of Maryland, College Park. One of the things that came up quite a bit was the fact that we needed to build these movements together, not just have it be all Black people, only Black people talking about an issue. I'm not saying that there's not a place for that type of organizing, but ultimately in this country, which is a country of a diverse set of constituencies, it is always more powerful to have more people with you and more different types of people with you. And so we organize with labor, we organize with immigrant advocacy groups, we organize with all different manner of folks, women, people from the LGBTQ community. We organize with every stripe to try to make sure we did things that were right, push for what was right. And so I got to know a lot of labor organizers, and actually my first job out of college, full-time job, was with SEIU. And we were focused on helping to promote collective bargaining, organize folks, and we were really focused on, efforts to get the state to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And then the third thread was environmental justice. Actually, my first paying job before, I got the full-time job was with Environment Maryland. And, I learned so much and we worked so much around protecting the Chesapeake Bay and other environmental interests within the state of Maryland. And so those are the things that led me to where I am today, because ultimately through that advocacy and through my dismay about what I would see from public officials who were supposed to be fighting for the people, as I was working on these issues, I became interested in whether there was a way for me to be even more impactful in a positive way. That didn't necessarily mean initially I wanted to be in elective office, because I always had a certain skepticism about elected officials, and I didn't want to be part of that crowd. But thanks to the encouragement and feedback and advice of a number of individuals, I did take the plunge. And initially it was humbly to serve as a member of the city council. I ultimately did win, and I'm grateful for that. And then, of course, people urged me to keep jumping, young man. And I'm humble and grateful now to serve as the youngest African American mayor in America and the mayor of Greenbelt, Maryland. But it really just started because I believe what Congressman Parent Mitchell said is important. He said, look, when you make a commitment to fight against racism, that is a train you never can get off. It is your entire life. And initially I thought it was just, hey, how can we get justice for Trayvon? How can we get justice for Mike Brown? But ultimately what I realized is it takes a more sustained commitment if we want to make a positive difference. So that brings me to what I am doing right now. I'm the mayor of Greenbelt, but the reason I decided to run for U.S. Senate, which I'm now a candidate for U.S. Senate in Maryland, is I've had an opportunity and I've listened to so many different of my constituents as they grapple with some of the biggest issues in America right now, not the least of which is the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen people get sick. We've seen so many people die. We've seen people, deal with economic devastation. And we've seen and listened to people super duper concerned about the actions and inactions of government leaders at various levels, but including at the federal level. And I can get into some of the details about what has transpired right, what has transpired wrong, but I can tell you that enough is enough. And as audacious as it may seem, I believe that I have something to offer. And I'm humbled and grateful that next June, the people of Maryland are going to have an opportunity to assess what I have to offer against the alternative.
Wow. So just to be clear, you are currently the youngest Black mayor in the whole of the United States of America. You were elected at, I think, the age of 27 years old. And you're now 28 years old, and you are running for the United States Senate here in the state of Maryland, where I live, which is phenomenal. And I think something to be noted. And you are running on 3 core principles. And those strike me as firmly rooted. And your motivation seems to be inspired by more than just the politics of the day. And I'm really curious, with all the founders that come on the show, I'm really curious about your constitution, not just where you come from geographically, which I'm interested in learning more about Greenbelt. I know a little bit about Greenbelt, very interested. But where do you come from? Like, who are your people? Who helped you developing that vision, that understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think let's take it back to 1992. I was born in the year of Rodney King. And so I was born in a year of racial unrest and unrest around racial injustice, and of course the verdict in the handling of the Rodney King case is kind of diametrically opposed to what we just saw this past week in the case of George Floyd. That's not to say that the case of George Floyd ends all of the problems in America, but certainly it was a relief that we had never seen in this country when it came to police violence against an unarmed African American. And this was unfortunately one of the most gruesome incidents that we had ever witnessed, that we had ever been aware of taking place in real life, not in a video game, not in a movie, but in real life. And so I say that just to say that I believe that the times that we come up in, whether you were born in the 60s or the 50s or the 40s or in 1992, it's relevant to the paradigms that you ultimately adopt. Doesn't mean that everybody born in 1992 is going to think the way I do, but it does mean that there's a historical and cultural context in which I was thrust into this world. On one side of the womb, we're listening to verdicts. On the other side of the womb, we're in this world. We're in this unjust world that produced that verdict, right? That's relevant. And so I am, so that's number one. Number two, I think it's also helpful to note that I was named after Colin Powell, and there's something intentional about that. on the part of my parents. One thing about Colin Powell is that, you know, at that particular time, I think there were a couple of things that sort of influenced my parents' decision. One of which is at the time he was a leader. My parents have always wanted me to be a leader. I believe that fundamentally. And he was somebody who represented both of my grandfather's wildest dreams coming true. And now, why do I say that? Well, both of my grandparents, I'm sorry, my grandfathers served in the U.S. military. And they served in the U.S. military at a time when this country would not serve them. Much of this country would literally not serve them. You go into certain restaurants, literally would not serve them. And so there's an irony in the sacrificial service of people who were Black and who said, you know what, I will put my life on the line for this country that does not value my life. And even to this day, we have questions about the extent to which this country values life. And so that is one piece, right? Their reverence for the military. I think that, you know, General Powell, who was the first Black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, represented something really inspirational to my parents and to many Black people in America. And so that I think as well was relevant to just everything that happened since, in terms of my parents wanting me to strive toward greatness, but not just greatness for myself, but greatness in service, right? Now I'll be candid. Once again, I grew up wanting to be an NBA player, so I wasn't always on this, but I will tell you that it's always been in the background that they have instilled in me an appreciation for service, an appreciation for the government. They in the case of my paternal grandfather, for example, he met my grandmother at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. My dad worked for the federal government. And so there was always this, you know, my family's full of civil servants. And that was kind of the pathway to social mobility for a number of Black people, particularly in this area. Prince George's County, of course, is a county of many migrants from the DC area who came to this area in the pursuit of better opportunities with the federal government. So those are things that I think were playing in the background. But again, if you want to understand kind of why I went in the direction is Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, I don't want to downplay how important it was for me in terms of thinking through the precariousness of my life as a young Black man. The fact that those things could happen, and it's not that we didn't know that those things could happen, but the way that those were thrust into the spotlight in a way that I think was unprecedented, and then to just see the outcome, it told me, and it highlighted in a spectacular way, in a sad way, just how far we were from the dreams that had been envisioned by not only my grandfathers, but probably more prominently by folks like Dr. King and individuals that to this day I look up to, like Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth and Reverend Ralph Abernathy, the three musketeers of the civil rights movement. These are people who, you know, I'm an old soul, man. You know, I'm 28, but I don't think like a lot of 20-year-olds when it comes to some of these issues. And that's not to say I think better, but I think more old school when it comes to civil rights. I really do have I think there's a venerable legacy that we should be mindful of, even as we push toward these new conversations around Black Lives Matter and all of that, which I support. So anyways, that's kind of me, you know, old soul that really just wants to see the culmination and completion of the work and ideals that were professed long ago by our forefathers, you know, whether it was Dr. King or Carter G. Woodson, you know, and you know, that's my thought, you know, W.E. Du Bois, what you name it.
I know you're telling the truth when you say you're an old soul. And I know as well that wisdom is hard earned. And I know that one of the fastest and most reliable ways to acquire wisdom is to kind of sit at the footstool of your elders, right? The people who love and care about you and know your constitution and understand you in almost a divine way, right? And closest only to, I think, your ultimate creator. My question for you, as I look at a picture of you here with an older lady, I'm guessing is a relative, is
Yeah,
what's your current relationship with your familial elders?
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, I mean, it's a bittersweet conversation to have, right? That's my grandmother. I love my grandmother. She is almost 100 years old. And I can tell you that, that picture is, that's a moment, after I became mayor and I was sworn in. And, I can tell you that, it's one of reverence, I can tell you growing up, kind of going to family dinners, and having these conversations about history. I mean, I learned so much about, our family's history, but also Black history, the country's history, and the intersection of all of the above. The history of the local history issues, right? All of my grandparents migrated from the Jim Crow South to DC. Not even all at the same time, but it just so happens that they all ended up there, right? And so that move, as we analyze it historically, reflects the precariousness of life everywhere in America, but including and especially at that time in the Jim Crow South, and in a desire to get away from that, right? But even as we come up north to DC and Maryland, there are things we have to get away from as a people, right? Even in the great state of Maryland, in the home of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, you had Freddie Gray, you have Anton Black, right? And so that's not to say that that was every conversation, but I can tell you that once we get past the subtle seduction, the subtle seduction of my grandma's mac and cheese, right? We start to have real conversations, right? We broke bread, but they also fed my head, right? If that makes sense, right?
does.
With knowledge and wisdom that, to this day is, it's invaluable, right? And these are so like, and what I appreciate so much about these elders in my family. And by the way, she's my last remaining grandparent who was living on this earth, right? I unfortunately, when I was in middle school, I actually lost both of my paternal grandparents in the exact same week. I mean, it was traumatic.
Sorry.
And it at least temporarily broke my spirit. But prior to me being even born, my maternal grandfather was already dead, and he had died as a result of lung cancer. And so, some of the wisdom is shared through the successes of my elders and their offspring. I mean, I have an uncle who went to Yale. I have, uncles. I mean, I have family who have gone to Duke, Maryland, Yale. Lawyers. I mean, doctor. I mean, I have. Look, our story. One of the things that I said when I was sworn in, I said, look, there's so much success that we could talk about with our family. I'm the youngest Black man in America. At the time, I didn't even know that. But one of the things that I underscored was that, ironically enough, because my last name is Byrd, and because that is my paternal side of the family's last name, my grandfather, who actually lived in DC, and worked for the federal government, he often would actually receive mail that was intended for then U.S. Senator Robert Byrd. And one of the things that I said, yeah, and so one of the things that I said, and he was the longest serving U.S. Senator in U.S. history. And he also, unfortunately, was the same senator who started a chapter of the Ku Klux Klan early in life. He's the same senator who filibustered against civil rights bills, right? And so the interesting thing about the stories of my grandparents, my grandfather, by the way, went to South Carolina State, right, is that these stories of me becoming mayor and of having, family members going to Yale and to these seemingly prestigious institutions of higher education is that these stories were supposed to be impossible, and yet these stories are true, right?
Hmm.
What I said to my grandmother then is that the stories aren't just about me; they started with you, right? And because of the way, that she instilled in all of us a sense of duty, and all of us, and by the way, by extension, my parents, and all of us a sense of duty, and all of us a sense that we mattered, our lives mattered, and that they should matter to other people as well, and that we could achieve. You know, there is this notion that we are still not where we need to be as a people. And my family, unlike I think some, families that achieve a status of upper middle class or even upper class, right? They never put on blinders about this country, right? They never said, they never took the Ben Carson route or frankly, the Herman Cain route, where you climb up the ladder and then you pull it up afterwards, right? And so from my standpoint, my success is not necessarily going to be measured by whether I become a U.S. senator, whether I become mayor. Am I the last Black U.S. senator from Maryland, right? That's the important thing. How do we make sure that we create that pipeline where the things that we achieve become less exceptional, but rather more the norm? That's important. It's not what we do for ourselves, it's what we do for others. And, hopefully in the final analysis, I have a good answer for that, but I'm still, as you said, building. And so, we'll continue to push.
And push you're doing, clearly. That's very helpful. You better, and what kind of the arc of your story as it develops and evolves. You talk about the significance of names. Your name, Byrd. Both your name, I suppose your surname and your first name having significance in ways. When you were at the University of Maryland, you were pivotal, the leader in having the name of the famous Byrd Stadium changed. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I wasn't aware of the connection in terms of the mail your grandfather used to receive, which is even more poetic and prophetic.
Yeah.
But can you tell us a little bit about that advancement, that push, that campaign?
Well, look, so a couple of things are instructive in context, and I appreciate you asking, because context is important as much as the outcome. So remember that, my dad went to the University of Maryland College Park. I'm a second generation Terrapin. So growing up, being somebody who actually loves sports, right? I was more of a basketball guy, but I watched football too, and I kind of had a fondness for football, or at least watching it. I wasn't much to play it. I thought, I wasn't built to play football as much as I was built to play basketball. I'm reasonably tall and lanky, right? And so, anyways, growing up, my we would go to this stadium every literally at least at least once a year, if not more, in terms of homecoming. And it's named for Byrd. Obviously, it's not our family in terms of, but the thing is, as I was young, obviously I did not have a critical lens to it. But, in college, one of the things that came up, and it wasn't me that actually started like a private dialogue about it. I just kind of, really helped to put it. Look, people in the past had tried to do that, get the name changed, but I just ended up leading the movement that ultimately culminated in the actual change. And I say that not to brag, but just to say that I want to give acknowledgement to those individuals who had been pressing for so long, right? Like we can talk about the family of George Floyd, but I think it's important and instructive to talk about the family of George Floyd in the context of the family of Rodney King, because to understand why the Floyd matter was so surprising and so such an important step of progress, although not the finish line is to understand what happened with Mr. King. And so I acknowledge those individuals who came before me, who tried and who raised the issue. And it was just as right then as it was when we got it done. It's just that, they finally made the right decision. But so I say this because my dad went to Maryland. Black man went to Maryland. And this was not that long after school finally was integrated. And then the other thing is, growing up and playing sports, one of the few arenas of life where we found a high level of reasonable equality of opportunity and mobility for African Americans in a way that we just don't see in other professions. Not to say that there's not Black lawyers or Black doctors, but it's to say that when it comes to professional sports, we have in so many ways found solitude in our excellence across the board. And so, I'm sorry, solace, not solitude. And so when it comes to football, one of the challenges that I had with that building, with that stadium, and this is more of a challenge that I have with that than I did with a lot of other buildings, even a school named after Robert E. Lee, which, by the way, I think those should be, is that you have a team that is predominantly Black, and they're playing in a stadium that is honoring an individual who would not have wanted them at the school, let alone on that field. And so there's something insulting about asking these individuals to toil under a labor that is at once a dangerous labor of love and at the same time a labor of untold profits, right? And to do it under the symbolic guise of this individual, right? This is an individual who, ironically enough, was not only a racist segregationist, this was an individual who actually was the chief antagonist to Thurgood Marshall as he sought to desegregate schools throughout the South. Right?
Let that sink in. That we were even having folks play on that field to begin with is unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last thing I'll say about it is, what was also interesting is that, this is an individual, because I actually believe in excellence, right? I believe if you do great things, there's at least an argument to be made that you could be honored for it, right? But the irony for me is that he was actually bad for the athletic program in Maryland on two fronts. Number one, first of all, I think in 2021, everybody in America knows that if you're an athletic director or a football coach and you don't recruit African Americans, you're a fool. Everybody knows that. That's number one. Number two, even with when it came to his administration of white staff and white personnel, he made major mistakes. Probably arguably the best college football coach of all time is a guy named Bear Bryant. He actually coached at Maryland before he got to Alabama. And when he was at Maryland, Curley Byrd ran him out of town because he was a bad leader and a bad judge of talent. Bear Bryant took his talents to Alabama and became one of the best coaches of all time. I mean, that's like Phil Jackson's leadership of New York, the New York Knicks. He ain't doing a good job. So from my standpoint, he wasn't just racist. He was actually a subpar leader from the standpoint of athletics, even if that's what you care most about. And so, those are my concerns. There's other things we can get into in terms of there's a lot that went into that, but that was my concern, is that we need to promote the right values, not celebrate the wrong things. And I thought it was a slap in the face to pretty much every Black student or Black athlete that came through those doors, or even Black staff or administrator.
And I think the efficaciousness, forgive me, folks, if that's not a word, let's just say the efficacy of your efforts, I think speaks to the thoughtfulness of your approach to coalition building and to building constructively towards a vision of justice, right? I'm very curious about your jump. I'm not unfamiliar with, audacious efforts. And I actually think, you got one life to live that God gives us with, and our duty, this is my belief, is to go out and to plant seeds and to do good things for the people, for all people, with the gifts that we've been bestowed. So you're making a big leap. Yes, you're the mayor of a city, one of America's, 3, I think, New Deal cities. And I want to learn a little bit more about Greenbelt before we get done. But I want to understand what on earth you're thinking. I love it. I love it. But what makes you think in concrete terms that the United States Senate is ready for Mayor Colin Byrd, or that you are ready for what it takes to get there and to serve there admirably?
Well, it's not so much whether the United States Senate is ready for Colin Byrd. Even though I will be a member of the U.S. Senate, I don't work for the U.S. Senate. I work for the people of Maryland ultimately, right? And currently I work for the people of Greenbelt. So I think it's important that the U.S. Senate does not pick its senators. The people of the great state of Maryland pick the U.S. senators from the great state of Maryland. And that distinction is important because if the U.S. Senate picked its U.S. senators, you never have a black senator, right? And that's just the reality of the history of this country. When the people in power pick the people who are empowered, then the power of the people is disempowered. And let that sink in. I don't know if I said it too quick. Now I'm kidding. So basically, what I'm trying to do is, I do think the people of Maryland are ready. And if they're not ready right now, I have every expectation that they'll be ready by June of 2022. They don't need to be ready right now. Look, this is a marathon. But I think here's the issue. Right now, we are dealing with two of the biggest issues in American history. The unrest around racial injustice, police brutality, and probably more universally and more importantly to more people, the COVID-19 pandemic. And I can tell you that the U.S. Senate and senators like the incumbent, against whom I'm running, Chris Van Hollen, have made a number of missteps, major mistakes that are worth examination and our consideration and analysis. So, for example, the reason I'm in this race is because I am so concerned about the impact of the decisions that are being made and not being made as they impact my constituents. So I give a couple of examples. In the first stimulus bill that was passed, the CARES Act, the federal government provided state and local government aid. Great. But here's what many people who are not in a position like mine missed. And that is, they left out over 99.9% of the municipalities in America. Small and medium-sized cities like Greenbelt and cities across the state of Maryland were left out of that bill. And because Greenbelt is a New Deal town, because we were founded by the federal government, I know very well from a historical standpoint and from a policy standpoint that we cannot afford to have a federal government that disinvests in cities in times of unprecedented crisis. That was the lesson of the New Deal for Greenbelt, right? They invested in our city in times of economic crisis. Then it was the Great Depression. Now it is the Great Pandemic. And so that's number one. And by the way, while they were not providing that direct aid to small and medium-sized cities like Greenbelt, Senator Van Hollen, instead of standing up for us, what did he do? He went on the Senate floor and he gave floor speeches about the lack of aid for DC. By the way, DC, I agree with him that DC needed more money. I agree that DC should be a state. I agree with all of the above. But here's the challenge. If you represent the state of Maryland, why are you silent on the municipalities that got left out? And by the way, DC got money. We didn't get a dime directly from the CARES Act. We had to beg for it from the county. And across the state, you had other cities that didn't get a dime at all. So that's number one, right? And that might not matter to all of the folks that listen, because that's a wonky insider issue. But more to the point of more broadly a issue in the most recent stimulus bill that was passed, supposedly with Democratic majorities in both chambers. You had the U.S. Senate and the American Rescue Plan strip out the $15 minimum wage. I told you, labor justice is why I got in this. That was totally unacceptable. Number one, not only did they strip out the $15 minimum wage, number two, they lowered the weekly unemployment benefits. Right? These are things that impact how many Americans will be living in poverty. These are things that impact my constituents who need those unemployment benefits, not to be smaller, but to be bigger. And the other thing that they did, and this gets to what's wrong with politics in general, not just the U.S. Senate or the U.S. Congress, but what's wrong with politics. You and I both know that not that long ago, there was a campaign, two campaigns ongoing in Georgia for U.S. Senate. And Democrats across this country and in that state promised $2,000 stimulus checks to the American people. What ended up coming out was $1,400 checks. The American people were promised $2,000. They shorted the American people $600. They did it in plain view. And I'm telling you that while I think it may become normalized in some people's mind for somebody to break their signature campaign promise, I think there's something fundamentally wrong with politicians telling you one thing one day on the biggest issue. It's not a small issue. And then the next day doing a different thing within a matter of weeks. I mean, this was weeks after the election. You started hearing them backtrack on $2,000 check. So from my standpoint, it's the notion of, hey, look, there's a mishandling of the pandemic that's going on. I mentioned these bills, but the other thing that I hope that we can, be reflective on as Marylanders is the fact that the rollout of the vaccine was terrible. It was terrible in Maryland. It was terrible across the country, and it was extraordinarily inequitable. We have U.S. senators that did not provide the type of oversight and guidelines that we need to have an equitable rollout of the vaccine. And so we saw more people get sick, more people die, more people wait in long lines as a result. Those are things that impact my constituents tremendously. And I just wanted to make sure that folks understood that there's a different way, right? There's a different way to be represented. And I look forward to making that case. I get it. It's a long shot in some people's minds, but I've seen half poor shots go in before. That's the thing. That's the thing. I've seen it happen. And so I'm inclined to believe it can happen. Right. And the beautiful thing about politics is it's not all up to chance. It's the people that get to decide. And I think some of our politicians have forgotten that.
And I think sometimes when the people can be reminded of the power that the people have, our politicians and our institutions can be reminded of the limits of their own power. So I support you in that conversation. And I'm very, very intrigued and excited by the way you talk about the future and, your responsibility as a leader. I witnessed you, along with the rest of Maryland, kind of go toe to toe with our current governor at a press conference maybe a week and a half ago. And I think what was definitely an impromptu display there is congruent with the way you're talking today. All right, the way you're speaking, the conviction with which you're speaking about, in the particular, the COVID-19 situation, our handling of it across the country and in the state of Maryland in particular, but also just generally your impression that power should always be accountable to the people in every way. So I guess I'm curious about that incident, or not incident, that moment, that good trouble, so to speak. And I'm also curious, as an extension from that question, about how you intend to keep yourself accountable in the long term. I'm sure so many of these politicians start with good intentions and then are not corrupted, but confronted with the limitations of the systems under which we. How do you keep yourself grounded and in check long term? So
let me quickly answer the governor thing. The reality is the governor was coming to my city for a photo op. It was a vaccination. So just for context, it was a FEMA vaccination center, federally run vaccination center coming to Greenbelt, which we pushed for. The governor who had an opportunity, who had multiple opportunities to bring mass vaccination site to the city of Greenbelt, a state mass vaccination site to the city of Greenbelt. He did not do it, but he wanted to come through for the photo op. Now, at the same time, I can tell you that that's fine. But at the same time, I've tried to dialogue directly with the governor about various concerns that I've had about his handling of the pandemic. Now, he was coming to the city for a photo op and he was interacting with me, and I continued to have these concerns, which he refused to meet with me to address. So in that context, you know, on the very rare occasion that he did come to the city, by the way, he very rarely comes to the city. I don't think he ever had been to the city prior to that, both before and after. I'm sorry, both before I became mayor and after I became mayor. And he's been governor for quite some time now. I said, look, we're going to address it. And look, the state's rollout of the vaccine was extraordinarily inequitable. It's gotten a little better, but it's still a gap between blacks and whites, brown communities and white communities. You know, when it comes to the vaccination rates, and between places like Prince George's County and, you know, other places in the state. He's been dismissive of Baltimore's concerns about his vaccine distribution efforts. So I wanted to raise that concern because, again, the individuals that suffer from what he's done when it comes to the vaccine rollout, these are individuals that I represent. These are people all across the state of Maryland. Number one. Number two, I was very concerned that he, against the wishes of public health experts, against the advice of public health experts, had accelerated the state's reopening. And we have actually literally seen the consequences of that in terms of increased daily COVID-19 cases in the state of Maryland. More people are getting sick, more people are going to die because of the decisions that he's making. And so I wanted to make sure that we lifted up those concerns, because very rarely are those concerns lifted up by people who have a voice, right? If I have a voice, I'm going to use it, barring me losing my voice as I'm doing right now. But what I'm trying to say is, you know, I wanted to make sure that we raise those concerns, and I had other concerns, including about, you know, some things that were happening in the county. But, you know, specifically, if you're asking about the governor, that's what happened there. Now, how do I hold myself accountable? That's a great question. Look, first of all, the people have opportunities to hold me accountable, and I welcome those opportunities, and I actually embrace those opportunities. And I continue to make sure that I am in connection with the people, right? I am what I would say a rare politician who readily will give out my cell phone number to my constituents and even to people who don't live in the city. Because the reality is this: if you can't talk to me, then I'm behaving as though I don't work for you, right? We have, if you look at U.S., ask yourself this. I'm not saying you got to answer this question, but I think what's striking about the aloofness of Congress is that you do know that it's virtually impossible to get the email address of a member of Congress. It's not on their website. That's a pretty simple, interesting thing that tells you their attitude toward public engagement, right? Let alone cell phone number, let alone actually being able to interact with them. Look, people see me in the community, and they will continue to see me in Greenbelt, in Prince George's County, in Baltimore, and in every county across the state, both before and after I'm elected as a U.S. Senator. I believe that as long as I continue to be somebody who is up by and for the people, that accountability will be natural. The accountability goes away when you start to, you know, raise money in ways that are more unseemly and from interests that are more seemly. I try to deal with folks that when I raise money, I try to raise them from ordinary people. I try not to make the basis of a fundraising pitch what I can do for a well-financed special interest. Now, that's not to say that if somebody has money, they're necessarily a bad person, but it's to say that if the reason that you're giving me money is because there are millions of dollars that you can stand to benefit from a decision that I'm making, and you're giving it with the expectation that I'm going to make a decision favorable to that, you know, that is something that can decrease your accountability to the people. Now, frankly, I'm the type of person that could take that check campaign donation wise and still do the right thing. But I think to a certain extent, people have to be wary about their own resolve to ignore and move past the type of things that people do for them. And so I try to make sure that I don't ask people for too many favors as well, because you start asking too many favors, all of a sudden, you racked up debts that you didn't know you had. So I try to make sure that I'm doing favors and I'm doing things for the people rather than always asking people for stuff.
Wow. Okay. I know a lot of leaders need to copy and paste that last principle. I really enjoyed this, Mayor Byrd, and I'm stopping only because I know you told me before we got started that you got a busy day. You're back to back, and the way you're talking, what you told me about yourself, I know you're the type of mayor that would probably go over to continue this conversation. So as we close, in light of the kind of days that you have, I just want to know, how can the people be in contact with you? If you're short of you giving your cell phone number on the air, I can confirm that you do give your cell phone number out freely, because that's how I got in touch with you. How can they be in touch and in support of the vision you're building and, of your campaign for the United States Senate as the senator from the state of Maryland?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I've enjoyed the conversation as well. Thank you so much. And thank you for your respect of my time. Look, there's a couple of different ways folks can connect with me directly. One, you can hit me up straight up. I mean, my phone number is 301-957-5014. Again, that's 957-5014. My email address is colinabyrd@gmail.com, COLINABYRD@gmail.com. You also can follow me on Twitter, social media. On Twitter @Mayor Byrd, @Mayor Byrd. Facebook @Vote Colin Byrd, Vote Colin Byrd. And then, beyond that, how folks could support, particularly if folks are interested in donating, which I'm not going to make a hard pitch on, but certainly if folks are so inclined, if that's what God lays on your heart, on your head, I definitely would be grateful for that and embrace that. You could go to my website at colinbyrdforsenate.com, FORsenate.com. And, there'll be directions there about how to do that. And of course, if you have any questions or concerns about that or anything else, like I said, feel free to hit me up directly. But I'm reasonably accessible. So folks that are interested, feel free. Now, can I just say one more thing, Mr. Williams? Though,
please do, man.
Sometimes I'm so accessible that people don't even look at me as a politician. And that's fine, because I don't seek to be a politician, but I don't want my level of accessibility to be misconstrued for, me not taking very seriously the need to be circumspect about the use of my time and about my time. So, every once in a while I will get a call that's just ridiculous about something that's not germane. And so, if you want to blow me up about stuff like that, just think about it. I definitely hear out folks of all different points of view, but I typically try to be in business when I'm talking. So I'm happy to help.
You are one of the more respectful and thoughtful public servants that I've come across. So I ask people as well, please respect the mayor's time. There's clearly work in progress. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you coming on my show. This is a show for Black founders. These are conversations with the greatest and most gifted founders you don't know yet. And I feel fairly certain that the entire world will learn about your work and your efforts. So I encourage you to continue. Thank you so much, Mayor Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Have a blessed day, sir.
Okay, have a wonderful day.